Would you look at that? I need a haircut. Hey guys, my name's Gloria and welcome back to my channel. If you like what I'm doing here, don't forget to like and subscribe down below and let me know what you're currently reading in the comments because I'm always looking for new books to read. Today though, I want to talk about a few books that I have read recently, and I read a couple of these at Christmas actually, so maybe it wasn't that recent, but they are a few of the physical books I've read recently, and I do have a lot of thoughts about them, good and bad, but I'll get into that. So the books I want to talk about today are Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King and Owen King. I have a non-fiction book, The Haunting of Alma Fielding by Kate Summerskill. And I also have The Burning Girls by C.J. Tudor. Quite different, but they all have a running sort of feminine theme to them, which is interesting. So the first one I want to talk about, I brought this up, it was a big chunker. I brought this and the non-fiction one up to my family's for Christmas because I had a long drive up and back and I ended up getting the plague while I was there, so I had time in quarantine to do some reading. So this one, the basic premise is that a global phenomenon happens where at a certain time it sort of sweeps across the world. Americans start getting wind that, you know, on the eastern side of the world women are falling asleep, and once they fall asleep they start to grow a cowl, almost like a chrysalis, like butterflies and moths have, and the moth is quite a huge theme in this. And once they start to grow this like on their face and their entire body, if anyone tries to rip it off or to wake them up, they get violent and they will kill basically anyone around them, whether it's family, friends, children. They will try and kill them, and then they'll go right back to sleep and start growing it again. And obviously this creates a lot of issues. We're told it from the perspective of the small town where the sheriff is a woman, where there is a women's prison, so obviously the warden of that prison is a woman. A lot of the jailers, the workers there are women. Everyone in the prison is a woman, so they're all going to fall asleep at some point. And once all of these start to happen, the men don't know how to act. They don't know whether they should be protecting their women who are falling asleep. They don't know whether they should be trying to keep them awake. They have wives and daughters and everything. So it's a whole big shit show, pretty much. But conveniently, or that's why we're told from the perspective of this town, is because right as this starts to happen, a mysterious woman shows up, and she is picked up by the sheriff because it seems like she has just violently attacked someone who was selling drugs out of his trailer in the middle of nowhere, and she gets picked up and taken to the women's prison. And the thing about her is that she can fall asleep and wake up normally. She has no issues. She doesn't start growing this thing on her face, and they quickly realize that if anyone outside the town finds this out, they're going to try and come for her because clearly she has some sort of immunity to this. She seems to know something about it, or maybe she's created it herself, we don't know. So this woman, who of course is called Eve, seems to be the key to this, and she has chosen this town to appear in. So that's a basic premise of Sleeping Beauties. I'm going to start with my first gripe about it, and it's a writing gripe actually. It's not particularly about the story or the plot or anything, but it's something that if you ever take a creative writing class or join a writing group or anything, it's one of the first things that people will sort of point out and tell you is an issue, and it's having multiple characters with names that are too similar. So if you have a story of 3 people and they're all called John, Johnny and John, obviously the reader is going to get confused between those characters, particularly if they're similar. If it's like a first draft, obviously sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between characters, but even in like big books like this, you shouldn't really have too many characters with the same names because it can get very confusing for the reader. And there are actually so many characters in this that there's like 3, these are all pages of lists of characters, because there are so many characters in this book from the entire time, and we pretty much go into all of their perspectives at some point, and it was too much, and there are too many characters with similar names. The very first characters you're introduced to are Linny, who is the police dispatcher, and Lila, who is the sheriff. And of course they interact a lot, Linny and Lila, and immediately I was like, okay, I need to remember these two are different people. I'm going to remember these two. Unfortunately, there's a lot more than 2. I picked a couple of letters there, and I just went through and wrote down all the people who had the same first letter of their name. And some of these you might think, well, they don't sound anything alike. But when you're reading through and you've got like 100 different characters, and it just gets really confusing. So there's Lila, Linny, Lawrence, and Lowell. Then for J, there's Jared, Jessica, Jack, JT, Johnny, Jamie, Janice, and Janet. Or we have Rita, Roger, Reed, Ree, and Rup. We have Elmore, Elaine, Eric, and Eve. We have, and this one was just ridiculous to me, Millie, Molly, Margaret, Mary, Maynard, Michaela, Magda, Mick, and Maura. And that's just a couple of letters, and it's like the main characters, the main people who are really the plot movers in this, have very similar names to secondary characters, smaller characters. Like Millie and Molly, I think one of them's an old lady and one of them's a baby. So it was a mind melt, really, getting through this book just because of the names. And it's kind of like, Stephen, you've been writing for a long time. That's a really basic kind of rule. You wouldn't really do that unless it was on purpose. So I was trying to think, are these characters sort of mirror images of each other? Are they like supposed to be opposites or something? But I couldn't find any correlation. They weren't. They were just badly named, in my opinion. I think there's just way too many characters. I don't think it needed that many people. The actual story, the premise is interesting, but I feel like a lot more could have been done with it. It's obviously stuck in a very heteronormative gender binary thing, and like we know that gender isn't that specific. Gender is not an absolute binary. You know, even if you're talking about biology and chromosomes, there are going to be people who fall asleep who you wouldn't think would fall asleep, or people who you would expect to fall asleep who don't fall asleep. But is it then, if it's not the biological sex, is it just the gender you assume? So would there be trans people falling asleep, or would there be non-binary people? What are they doing? You know, that could have been far more interesting to me if there were a character or a few characters like that. You know, how would this thing affect them? It does look at the violence that would occur if this were to happen. We all know there's violence against women and girls is rife across the world, and one of the things about this growth that starts to happen on them is it is extremely flammable. So any kind of flame that gets near someone who's sleeping, and they will just go up like that. So of course this leads to, you know, Christian people, well, not Christian people, religious people of all different religions, or even just violent people as well, just setting fire to them because they think it's a sign of the apocalypse, it's a curse from God, or they're supposed to be killed because of course they're they're violent as well. If you wake them up, they become violent, so they should be gotten rid of or whatever. But then it's like, what, you're gonna get rid of every single female in the world? So that leads men to trying to hide their wives and their daughters and their families to try and protect them from these people. And it sort of dips its toe into that, into the idea of men's violence against women, but again, it didn't dive in deep enough to it for me. Instead, we're stuck in this small town. Characters just weren't all that interesting to me. And the character of Eve, this person who comes in who clearly is some sort of paranormal being who falls asleep and can wake up again, and she's just decided to wander in and is saying, hey, I've decided that if you can keep me alive, as in if you can stop the men from this town from coming in and killing me or taking me away or whatever, I'll let you decide whether you want your women to come back or not. And there's no explanation as to why she's chosen this particular town, these particular people. There's no real explanation to her at all, or to the phenomenon by the end of the story, and it just seemed a bit of a cop-out and a bit lazy to me. So I think the concept of the book initially was interesting, it does draw you in, but it just didn't pan out very well. Next up, I have The Haunting of Alma Fielding by Kate Summerskill. I got this in a book box as well, I think, and it is a non-fiction account. She's writing about, what's his name again? I think he was Nandor Fodor, who's a Jewish-Hungarian refugee who came to the UK, and he started not hunting ghosts, but investigating ghosts. He was, it says here, Chief Ghost Hunter for the International Institute for Psychical Research, and he investigated many different cases, and one of them in particular was Alma Fielding, and she was a housewife who started to be harassed by a poltergeist who would break things in her house and would throw things at her, would harm her. Objects would appear on her body, falling out of her sleeve or inside her shoe or something, and he was tasked to go and investigate this. And due to personal circumstances in his life and his career, he sort of staked a lot on this, and because of that, it was very important to him to prove that this was real, prove that it was a real poltergeist. Before this, he had sort of been in psychical circles, and in their magazines and stuff, he had been sort of touted as harmful to the psychic community because he disproved a lot of their sort of bigger name people. He did it with the best intentions. He was trying to prove that their phenomenon, their gifts and powers were real, but it turned out they were fakers, and he was trying to prove that Alma wasn't lying, that these actual things were happening. The interesting thing about a sort of non-fiction book like this is that Kate Summerskill grounds it in the time. So this was when World War I was about to happen, so a Jewish-Hungarian guy, obviously would be stressed out about this, as were all of Britain, most of the world were stressed out about it, and this was having an effect on their careers and their lives. And he had this issue where his family, all of his money was coming from trying to be a ghost hunter, and he was possibly about to lose his job. The Psychical Research Centre was losing money and was possibly going to be shut down if they didn't actually prove that there were ghosts, or there were poltergeists, or there was some sort of paranormal or supernatural phenomenon out there. It was really interesting to read it from that point of view. It's not just about the strange things happening, it's about the relationships of Nandor Fodor's family and also Alma Fielding's family, her issues with her husband and children and her background. And it's really sort of pointed out, and I realised after reading this that a lot of, if you're into these kind of stories, which I am, a lot of poltergeist activity happens around women. Particularly around young girls who they thought, I don't know if they still think this, but that starting puberty, starting their period was some sort of gateway for these poltergeists, for these phenomenon to happen. And it seems like she mentions a few cases in this that of women who have in some way lost a child, so women whose child died young or possibly had a miscarriage. It seems to be a phenomenon that affects those women, and it's really sort of interesting the way she goes into how, you know, it's a way of their sort of repressed trauma in this sort of coming to the forefront and being expressed in these ways of, particularly if they were assaulted in any way as a child or as an adult or whatever, or by their husbands or someone, they would always report, you know, being touched by these ghosts or being manhandled by these ghosts, or, you know, just some sort of violations. There would be times when there were objects that Alma produced that were almost like giving birth, you know, where they would just appear out of her. So it was fascinating to read this sort of account and the stakes behind it, because she wanted everyone to believe her, he wanted to believe her, and he wanted people to believe him, but he also wanted to expose her if she was lying about it, or if she was lying about any of it. And I like Kate Summerskill's writing. I really like how she did this. It says at the top here, best-selling author of The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher, and I just heard the true crime story about that, and that seems like a really interesting story as well, so I'm definitely going to pick that up from her. But if you're looking for like a real world objective account of some sort of paranormal experience, like, this is really fascinating to me. It really sort of roots it in the real world and is very interesting, so definitely take a look at that one. I really like that. So the last book that I have to talk about today is The Burning Girls by C.J. Tudor. So this, I just read it and I'm trying to remember what it was, but this is possibly a spoiler, but it's a spoiler that you find out in the first couple of pages. So it's just a little tweak of a spoiler. You're introduced, the Reverend Jack Brooks, okay? So Jack Brooks is bringing their daughter. They have had some issues in their parish, in their church, and they're sort of, people aren't happy with them, so they have to be moved from their parish, and they are moved to this small town out of, I think they were living in Nottingham. So the teenage daughter is not very happy. They moved to this small town where they find out that the pastor hasn't just, the reverend there hasn't just died, they've actually committed suicide in a very graphic way in the church, and there's stuff going on. It's one of those small town things. The small twist at the beginning is that you read the first couple of pages and you think, okay, Jack Brooks, single dad, Jack Brooks. It's actually the mother. Jack is short for Jacqueline, so that was a little mindfuck at the beginning there. But that's just a very small thing. It's not a huge plot point or anything. So we have this single mother who's a minister. Her late husband was also a minister, and he also, oh no, he didn't. He didn't commit suicide. He was murdered. This is one of the issues I had with this book, was that there were too many things going on at all times. And every time there was like a mystery, and then they solved the mystery, there was another sort of mystery attached to that, and everything was way too meshed in together. So let me backtrack. The main story of this is that the minister and her daughter have to go to this small town, and the Burning Girls is an old legend where back when they were killing Protestants, they wanted the whole of the UK to be Catholic, they were killing Protestants, and there were people in this town who were burnt to death because they were Protestants, and someone actually sold out these two young girls, these two children, and they were burned at the stake. And ever since then, the town has sort of honoured those people, and particularly the two girls, by making these little twig stick figures, and they would have like a Burning Girl ceremony every year or whatever to remember these poor people who had died. And that's where the Burning Girls comes from. About 30 years ago, I think it was, back in the 90s, there were two young girls, two teenagers, who went missing. So that's sort of a parallel to the two girls who were killed, and then there were two girls who went missing, and nobody knows where they went, and there's all these sort of family secrets. It's a small town thing. Everyone knows something, but nobody knows quite everything. My issue with it, it was written okay, it was fine. It is, yeah, some of it is in first person, some of it's in third person. That wasn't such a huge issue for me, but it was mainly just everything at once. It's not just the mystery of these two girls that went missing in the 90s, and it's not just like they went missing, what happened to them. Two very different things happened to them by different people. The Burning Girls, the big, like 100 years ago or whatever, that's a whole other issue that had other people dealing in with it. And then when they get to the town in the present day, the mother and daughter, there's a whole thing with people happening there and something happening with her daughter that's a whole big issue. But then there's also the thing that happened before that made her move, but that is also connected to previous things, but also now, and it just too much. It was just too much. There were too many threads to follow, too many characters that turned out to be other characters, or turned out to be connected to other characters, and turned out to be enmeshed in this whole thing. It was all just a bit too much for me. And I find myself just by the end of it with pretty much like a headache, because it was all too much, and I didn't really believe it in the end. Like I didn't feel like it was a full cohesive story that I could believe, and because of that I didn't really care so much about the characters. Like I couldn't get into them because there was too much going on all the time. I'd heard a lot of good things about this, but it just personally wasn't for me. If you're into lots of mystery and lots of twists, then go for it. It's not badly written. Definitely check out this if you're looking for a good non-fiction read. And this, you know, if you're a Stephen King fan, you'll probably read it, but it's a lot of time, so it's not really worth it unless you really want to. So those are 3 of the physical books I read recently. I shall be tackling a lot more of my physical TBR, and I'm also currently into my ebook TBR that I have on my phone as well. So plenty more videos to come in the future. Oh, my next video actually will be the giveaway announcement. Aha! stay tuned for that. I shall be giving away a cool book and some bookish goodies. Thank you so much for listening to my rant today. If you like what I'm doing here, you can like and subscribe down below. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much to anyone who has subscribed recently. I'm gonna shut up. Thank you for watching. I shall see you in the next video.